Adesso chiedo a Suor Brenda Dolphin che parlerà dal podio qui. Molti di voi conoscete già bene Suor Brenda, delle Suore della Misericordia, ex alunna dell'Istituto e professore emerito dell'Istituto, dove oltre agli impegni di insegnamento, accompagnamento e supervisione ha guidato con saggia pazienza il lavoro del centro di consultazione per diverse generazioni di studenti. Attualmente è superiore provinciale della provincia centro-meridionale delle Suore della Misericordia in Irlanda. And the subject of her presentation is Anthropology of the Christian Vocation, Quo Vadis Hodie? A question, a search, a map for the human odyssey into love.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. And good morning, everybody. And it's a wonderful privilege for me to be here today, to meet so many people after a number of years. And I'd just like to let you know that this paper comes with a health warning. It's not a purely academic paper, but rather it's based on Kierkegaard's famous saying, or his famous maxim, "We live our lives forward, we understand them backwards." So we take this vantage point of 50 years to share a short narrative account of the contribution of the Institute of Psychology towards enabling the universal call to holiness in the post-Vatican years. And it may not be described in exactly these words, but I'm using what I'm using now. But this is the understanding or the aim of the training offered by the Institute of Psychology, that our students and those they work with eventually become holy. And a holy person is someone who offers so little resistance to the presence and the power of God in her life that God is able to pour God's self freely into the person's heart and fill it with love. And that love flows out through the holy person's hands and her heart to all those who have need of God's love in the world, whatever shape or form that love takes. I'd like to divide what I have to say into three parts. I'd like to talk about biblical anthropology, and that is using the title of the conference, Adam, Where Are You? Then I'd just like to point out the Institute of Psychology, some strengths that have held firm through the past 50 years. And then I'd like to ask a question, Quo Vadis, into the future. So let's look at biblical anthropology, starting from Scripture. In Lewis Carroll's book, Alice in Wonderland, the white rabbit produces a letter in evidence in court and is told to read it out. He asks the king where he should begin, and promptly he is told, "Begin at the beginning until you come to the end, and then stop." This is not a bad piece of advice when asking the where of Christian anthropology in the world of the 21st century. What is the essential view offered of humanity in the opening pages of Scripture? And as we know, there are four major accounts of creation story in the Old Testament. There's Genesis 1, Genesis 2 and 3, Psalm 104, and Proverbs 8:22. In Genesis 1, the 7 days account of creation is given to us, and in a structured poetic way, the movement from darkness and the abyss to the universe where life is possible and is beautiful is indeed a beautiful and dramatic piece of literature. It's structured poetically with the ritornello of how God found this creation to be good and how he sees unfolding goodness in each of the days of creation. And then it culminates in Genesis 2 with the account of the creation of humanity. Human beings are created to steward God's goodness and continue the work of creation. Humanity is not the focus of this first account, rather the focus is on God's gift. Human beings, however, are given their role within this creative work. Stewardship is the responsibility of the human person in order to keep God's goodness alive and continue God's work in creation. So it follows then that the work of Christ and the church is the recognition of the goodness of creation and a constant sense of the sacramental presence of the Father in his creative work. This is only part of the creation story because in chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis, we have the Adam and Eve version of the story of creation. This is a very different story, focused on humanity and its role in the ongoing saga of created life. A key reminder in this version is that it is not good for man to be alone. Chapter 2, verse 18. A fundamental call to relationship. And this is not just a justification of marriage. It's a fundamental vision of the human adventure. Beginning at the beginning and often returning to it, challenges us to keep in mind God's creative vision for humanity at all times. Human beings are not meant to go it alone, but are called to overcome isolation and adversity through real relationship and solidarity with each other, with God, with all of creation. Biblical anthropology presents us firstly with God's amazing and eternal gift. It then goes on to portray the human response, which is intended to be simple, straightforward, but instead is complicated by human frailty and the misuse of human freedom. It ends up as the human dilemma, even the basic dialectic, if we use that, the constant struggle to grow in interior freedom. So, that being said, let us take a moment just to play with the conference question. Adam, where are you? And let's look at some alternatives. Where are you? Not where are you, but where are you? The question addressed to the man by God in Genesis chapter 3 is a question that resonates for all humanity for all time. Where am I? Where are you before God? Francis Thompson's words in The Hound of Heaven, I fled him down the nights and down the days, come to mind. But it started with Adam. And we ask, in how many ways and in how many places has the human person tried to hide from God and continues to do so in every age? How do you hide from God? However, this question also presupposes a second question. Adam, who are you? It's the identity question. Who are you before God? Who are you, Adam, now, and where are you in relation to God? Who are you, and where are you in relation to your fellow human being? Who are you now, and where are you in relation to yourself? Who are you now, and where are you in relation to creation? And one or two further questions come to mind, and I'm just putting them out for you to reflect on. Since the man had been given the privilege of naming all of creation, much knowledge had already been given him. Why did he need to ingest more knowledge? Why is enough such a difficult proposition for the human person? And in addition, here's another question for you. What if we were to turn things around and pose the question as coming from Eve? What if Eve were to ask the question, Adam, where are you? What do you think Adam's response might be? How might Adam defend his displacement behavior, blaming Eve for his own misplaced choice to eat the fruit. And Eve, in turn, is not without her own weakness. Her behavior mirrors that of Adam. She displaces responsibility onto the serpent. Therefore, we see that from the idyllic harmony of the garden as intended by God, the human situation spiraled into chaos through the shattering of true order in relationship at all levels. And I'd like you to hold that and think about it. To summarize so far, as mentioned above, biblical anthropology presents us with God's amazing gift of creation. As human beings, we're gifted with the goodness of creation. God has trusted us with responsibility and stewardship. We respond to that gift through relationship with God, each other, ourselves, other created things. And the important thing is the biblical anthropology helps us to understand and give meaning to who we are and where we are in these relationships. And this is no small gift for humanity, and especially for us in 2022. Equally, the story highlights what happens when these relationships break down, hiding from God, experiencing shame, blaming others, experiencing lack of peace and harmony. However, we also know that the creation story offers us hope. When God condemns the serpent, he also offers the possibility of redemption. Moving on quickly to the second part of my talk, and this is the strengths of the training in the Institute of Psychology that has survived over the past 50 years, and there are many of them, but I'm just going to take 3. And the first one is the Christian Anthropology, which is the basic foundational course. It's the basic foundational course in the Institute. Adam, where are you? This question highlights a particular practical challenge for all of us today. In our world, the belief that the human person is created in the image and likeness of God seemingly has little relevance for many people. Like, what have the scriptures to say, and how can they guide us in the era of artificial intelligence, bioengineering, global warming, cyber warfare? Traditional religions are largely irrelevant to technological problems, but they are, however, very relevant to identity. And since there's nothing truly human that does not find an echo in the hearts of Christ's disciples, every Christian is challenged to grapple with the identity question, where are you and who are you before God? What do you really believe, and what impact has this belief on your daily life? The response called for must be concrete. It cannot be simply an academic exercise. And von Balthasar describes discipleship in the following terms: effective listening to the one who calls, and growth in freedom for the expected response. And in this post-Vatican era, society is undergoing extraordinary changes in all spheres of life. In the areas of technology, there has been exponential developments in the last 50 years. These developments weren't there. They weren't dreamed of in 1971 when the Institute began. And you know, are those of you who are old enough to remember, for example, the era of no computer, no internet, no Google, no digital scoring, the MMPI, etc., etc. In the area of human relationships, even Vatican II was well aware that there were seismic changes beginning to make themselves felt. On the one hand, imbalances and discrepancies have arisen between the action and normative thinking, practical efficiency and moral conscience, between growing specialization and a universal vision of reality. In addition to unexpected conflicts between genders, A different relationship has emerged between woman and man, a vision of sexuality that contrasts with traditions that were once seen as binding and established. Male and female roles have undergone changes due to evolving science. At the same time, among people, there's also an aspiration towards an experience that conforms fully with the nature of the human being, in which the equal dignity of every person without distinction of race, sex, or ideology is upheld. And again, I've started a little bit in a roundabout way to getting to what I wanted to say. The areas of the training in the Institute of Psychology that I found very helpful and that, like, in retrospect would seem pivotal to me are the foundational course of the Anthropology, as I've just mentioned, the one-to-one accompaniment, and the structure of the course itself, which leads us into a few words on relationships. The foundational course on Christian anthropology led to an awakening to and a continual appreciation of, for example, the importance of the human person. Exploring and experiencing and entering more deeply into an understanding of the human person made in God's image and likeness was paramount, was foundational to this course. Our Christian faith teaches us that these words, the words of Psalm 8, "Who are you before God?" find their completion in Jesus, who rides into the personal history of each one of us, waiting, knocking on the door of our interior freedom. But our study of Christian anthropology forms a solid basis for our own sense of identity, as it deepens and consolidates our relationship with Jesus, who is an example par excellence of God's creation of humanity at its best. The insights of Rulle, Riddick, and Imode in their monumental research in an anthropology of the Christian vocation within a multidisciplinary context bring the revelation of God's engagement with the human person into the sphere of what is practical and usable for day-to-day life. By virtue of being human, we learn that the capacity is in the human person for opening out in response to God with an ever-deepening sense of freedom. But in addition, the person has various limitations, conscious and unconscious, that hinder that freedom in response to the love that is given to us first. The training in the Institute of Psychology teaches us never to reduce our understanding of ourselves or of another person simply to a simple label, which does not and cannot make sense of what precedes, nor can a simple label make sense of an ever-changing context within which being takes place. It challenges us to value, to reverence, to respect profoundly each and every person. And as the ability to respect and reverence the other grows and develops in our lives through the choices that we make, openness to and willingness to wash the other's feet deepens and strengthens within. Such an openness and respect can even cost one's life. And I remember here Olivier Maire, those of you who remember him. The human being is a mystery, and this we have learned, which lies hidden within a marvelous plan of God. The ability to cope with the complexity of this mystery without being afraid of the effort, without pretending to have understood all the extraordinary divine work. This is authenticity and augurs growth in the intelligence appropriation of the divine message. The truth of humanity is not visible. What a human being is cannot be adequately represented even by a very accurate description of individual historical trajectory, traced with the most complete documentation of objective facts. We still do not fully know the person, having done all that. We learn that no matter what appears on the surface, the person is something more, is a mystery to be loved and cherished. And for those of you who have time, I'd advise you to reread Human Development, Psychology and Mystery. As you get older, you begin to see the depth of what is offered in that textbook. The dilemma is that the human person is the wonder of divine work, and that is a cause of constant praise of God, the Creator. But at the same time, he or she is quite capable of rejecting the gift and rebelling against the giver. Secondly, I'd like to look at personal accompaniment. This is a formational experience, an aspect of the formational experience of training in the Institute of Psychology. And it's one of the most significant tenets that a person's freedom to respond to God's gift or love is not absolute and can be limited in ways that are not always within the ambit of the person's consciousness. We know that well. Another way of saying that is that as human beings, we tend not to learn automatically from the experience of life. For all of us who underwent a period of personal therapy as part of our training, and for whom that therapy, we called it vocational growth sessions, is a significant life experience, we find that that is something that has stood us in good stead over time. One of the constants you will hear from former students and ex-alumni of the schools of formators is the appreciation they have for the time spent in personal growth vocation. And this is particularly obvious for people who have been called into various forms of ministry in the church. Formation, yes. Leadership, youth ministry, spiritual accompaniment. Their consistent refrain is that the personal work that they underwent as part of their training stands to them when they have to deal with difficult interpersonal situations within dioceses and within communities. They come away from their experience in the Institute with some understanding of themselves and only some knowledge of the tools with which to learn from experience. This saves them in no small way from allowing personal difficulties to get in the way of handling more generalized, fractious issues. It enables them to, not always but mostly, to take space, to be more objective in seeking a resolution to a difficulty. It can even help the person to see that not all the difficulties they encounter are of their own making. And this is something that no amount of book learning can ever impart. In the realm of formation, which the course targets directly, the training in personal accompaniment, together with some insight into the use of psychological testing tools, are found invaluable for assisting the discernment of vocation at the initial stage and enabling growth at later stages. But deeper than ministerial competence, and this I feel is important, and allowing, as Father Kiley would always say, for the law of graduality, the experience of vocational growth sessions opens a door to self-acceptance that enables the gradual expansion of interior freedom and openness to God. A lifetime's work it is, the gradual, ever-deepening acceptance of who one is before God. Nothing more, but nothing less. This is one of the greatest gifts towards interior freedom which can be experienced. And the third aspect of the course that I'd just like to highlight, this is the actual structure of the course itself. One of the original insights of the Institute of Psychology in relation to the structure of the whole course was that the formative experience for personal learning has to be existential, integrating, proportionate, and supported. Those of you who are old enough to remember depth psychology and vocation, you'll get it there if you go look for it. But let me point it out to you. This insight, seemingly based on the assumption that human beings do not learn automatically from new experiences, because chronological age is no guarantee that a person will mature automatically, will mature emotionally, spiritually. Neither is the fact that having many and varied experiences of life a guarantee the person will mature. Proclaiming values does not mean that we actually live them. The readiness to learn from a new experience depends on the extent to which the person has enough interior motivational freedom to learn from a particular situation. Understanding this is essential for the discernment of growth in living values, and living Christian values especially. Therefore, an existential experience is one in which the person is allowed to test herself in a variety of tasks. And, the pressure of work in the Institute of Psychology is an existential experience that we all knew. It enables the person to confront her own self, challenge her own abilities, values, underlying needs, also exposes us to failure, a sense of frustration, and to loneliness. But only in this way will she have the possibility to know and accept her real self in the depth of her being. The integrating experience, the experience must be integrating. And this means that when a person is given a task, it is something. It's not just, for example, a token. It is something that will challenge her on all levels of her human existence: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. And you know that. A task that tests intellectual ability only and has little or nothing to say to other aspects of the person's psychic life will not strengthen her inwardly nor enlarge her capacity for making her own the values she proclaims. It must be proportionate, very delicate part of the training. Person improves her sense of self if she can perform her tasks with success in increasingly challenging situations. And then it must be supported. That is, the offer, as a person tries to handle or come to terms with a situation, the supportive help offered in the Institute finds expression in the one-to-one accompaniment. In retrospect, the whole training in the Institute carries these 4 elements. And in life after the Institute, if these are kept in mind, they can be very helpful and very useful to structure any ministry undertaken by the person. But more importantly, and this is something I want especially the students, present and past, to think about, more importantly, in terms of relationships experienced as encounter, as Papa Francesco would say, this structure nurtures one of the best overall experiences of the Institute. Within a 3 to 4 period, the possibility of significant encounter with the other on a variety of levels is extraordinary. As the course progresses and in line with its inherent structure, there's a possibility of encountering the other as student under supervision, as classmate, as client, as therapist, as supervisor, as friend, as leader, to name only some of the roles the student must shoulder, and sometimes engaging more than one role at a time. That's no small thing to say about training. The experience is certainly existential, integrative, proportionate and supportive, and it's well worth underlining this. And this just brings me very briefly to the topic of relationships. We live what Scripture reveals about the human person not by definition, but by living relationships, by exploring relationships the person has in a multiplicity of ways, with as much of reality as we can encompass or carry. Just one thing, and I'm just going to sort of close down a little on this. 50 years is a good moment to examine how male-female relationships, abilities, capacities, contributions are viewed in the institution. It is good to look at what has been achieved in the past 50 years in moving towards a deeper sense of mutual respect and equal collaboration, recognizing similarities and differences which are brought out very strongly in the creation story. At the same time, noting what could still be worked on in that area. However, the question remains, Adam, where are you? And we add equally, Eve, where are you? And finally, and let me be as brief as possible. Future challenges. In this part of the talk, I just make a halting attempt to look at some questions the Institute might ask moving into the future. Technology. In the last 20 years, the technological revolution has radically changed how the human person is viewed. We have the cyborg, the bionic man, the bionic woman, robots, Alexa, turn on the lights or turn out the lights, IVF, surrogacy, same-sex parenting. How people interact with others, with their environment, has also changed. So what challenges do these changes bring, and others, I mean there are other changes as well, bring to the training the Institute offers into the future? One practical example. What impact has the cell phone on students who present themselves today to the Institute of Psychology? Digital publics are characterized by forms of stranger intimacy that move extremely quickly across geographical spaces, across communicative modalities, and as such have become pervasive elements in contemporary life. Like, what would you do without your mobile phone? What would any of us do? And what did I do when I didn't have one? Young people in particular seek to define themselves today among a diverse ecology of screens. Cell phones have reshaped the scale and scope of our communication, a process that challenges what we are accustomed to and what we are willing to tolerate. So how does the ubiquitous use of the cell phone affect teaching in practice? How does it affect vocational growth sessions? People in this age have ambivalent longings for intimate soul communication. But how is this ambivalence, which is a pervasive aspect of communication today, how is that handled? And how are students trained to handle it? How are students of the Institute themselves trained to cope with this reality? What can they learn that they will enable them to work alongside new members who are used to cell phones as their alter egos? New members who've grown up with avatars and virtual reality. New members who have grown up in a world where truth is relative and fake news is a constant threat. How do we handle this? Another thing, this calls for a more focused research into the convergence and divergence of revealed Christian values with technology in its fullest sense, like impact of social media, of constantly communicating via the screen, of avatars, of cyborgs. And the one-to-one accompaniment is pivotal in the Institute. But in the last 50 years, mentioned again and again, demographic changes affecting all occupations pose questions as well as challenging experience in this field. The use of the tenets of depth psychology as a basic tool in carrying out vocational growth sessions was very helpful for the first 30 years of the life of the Institute. With the changing landscape within which students live and move today, some questions arise. What form of vocational growth sessions is suitable for a novice who is autistic, who has gender issues because of what is called neurodiversity? What attention is paid to the contribution of neuroscience to the understanding of the human person? What impact has data protection legislation on one-to-one accompaniment? At least in certain parts of the world, formal VGS, formal vocational growth sessions, are not possible with a novice, in religious life at least, as it may compromise boundary issues. How has the impact of sexual abuse in the church and the scandals that we have lived with, how has this affected how we see ourselves? Are we much humbler as a result? And how do we train our students in the art of VGS? Is there a possibility of modules on therapies such as trauma counselling, CBT? Like, what's the impact? And what are the questions we're asking, and how are we trying to answer? This leaves us with the question, how has the form of therapy used in preparing students changed over the years in order to adapt to differing developments and evolution in our world? I really should stop. I just say external supervision prepare students to look for supervision from people who have different psychologies, different modes of looking at the world. That helps us. Our identity is strong enough. That helps us to grow and develop. And I'd just like, in conclusion, to pay tribute for all of us who've had contact with the Institute of Psychology over the past 50 years. This Jubilee is indeed a graced moment. It gives us an opportunity to look back and see the extraordinary contribution to the understanding of the human person within the specific context of living one's vocation as a laywoman, layman, religious or priest in the Catholic Church. And I would like to say, because my contact with the Institute started in 79, and there are other people here who also started with me. That year, the number of students increased to 15. I believe when it started, was there about 4? Giuseppe was about 4. Anyway, practically from the beginning, the multiplier effect gained momentum from relatively small numbers of students which were limited, of necessity. We have, for example, there has developed shorter term but high quality in-service training courses for formators in our Scuola Performatori right around the world. The Centro Favre, established here, the more recent independent development of the Centro per la Protezione dei Minori, which now has been moved as the Institute of Anthropology, right? Interdisciplinary, etc. But look at all the multiplier effect from a relatively small number of students. Attest to the value of the service offered and the flexible ability of the Institute to respond to the needs of the time. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to the Visionaries, I'm not going to name them, but the Visionaries who asked the original question upon which the monumental founding research for the Institute was based. The people who worked tirelessly on this research, all those who participated with them in the longitudinal research project with over 100 vocationers over a period of years, all who supported that research materially, financially, spiritually, emotionally, and academically. The students, whose cooperation, collaboration, and generous sharing of time and talent down through the years have helped us to shape and reshape the Institute to what it is today. Professors, and I dare not name anybody, but would like us to take a moment to remember and give thanks for the great women and men on whose shoulders we stand here today, and who are still alive, some who are still alive, others who've gone to God. In all I've said, I'm very aware the Institute cannot do everything, but it can do something, and it can do it very well. And I just wish, and I know it'll happen, that the Institute may continue to have the wisdom to continue to dialogue with difference. Thank you.